Right now, every one of us, all of us in this room, senators, Amtrak, the Federal Railroad Administration, NTSB, the FCC, we need to do everything we can to facilitate the quick installation of positive train control, PTC, along our nation's railroads. PTC really stands for Protecting Train Customers, Preventing Train Collisions. That's what it really stands for. And it hasn't been implemented fully, and it has to be in a timely fashion. And that's why I've co-sponsored with Senators Feinstein and Blumenthal and Nelson the Positive Train Control Act, which would hold railroads accountable for implementing PTC systems as quickly as possible. A recent study estimates that Amtrak needs $21 billion in capital investments just to get the corridor to a state of good repair and lay the foundation for future demand. Well, last night, the House Republicans voted to cut Amtrak's budget by over $200 million. And that is unacceptable, because by cutting Amtrak funding, they are playing a dangerous game of railway Russian roulette, making tough decisions necessary by the people who are sitting at this table in terms of what will, in fact, get funded. So, Mr. Stadtler, how important is it that we see continued investment in Amtrak to ensure continued upgrade of the Northeast Corridor and throughout the country? If the appropriations bill the House passed last night becomes law, what types of critical safety technology trade-offs will Amtrak have to make, and what other negative impacts will customers experience as a result of these misguided cuts?
Thank you, sir. Continued funding is obviously critical. Consistent funding is critical as well. As has been well documented up and down the corridor, we have aging infrastructure that has been underinvested in. We have 100-year-old bridges all up and down the corridor, and we have lacked the resources to upgrade them and maintain them on a regular basis. We have always put safety first. We have used the limited funding we have to make sure that we'll have positive train control in place by the legislated deadline. We've used the funding we have to equip our locomotives off the corridor to ensure that we're ready when the freights are ready to have train control in place. But you're right, with limited funding, it presents us with very difficult decisions moving forward.
Okay, well, Mr. Stadtler, you mentioned concerns that there are places where Amtrak and the freight railroads use different, potentially interfering spectrum for their PTC systems, including on the crowded Northeast corridor between New Haven and Boston. What steps has Amtrak taken to ensure that that interference will not be a problem?
We're working very closely with the FCC. We're working very closely with the freight railroads that have the IETMS system on their right-of-way that is in close proximity to our right-of-way. We're doing significant testing and working closely, so when there are interference issues, we use one of the many mitigating tools to reduce the risk there.
Well, let me go to you, Mr. Mathias. What is the FCC doing in order to make sure that these separate systems do not wind up interfering with each other?
Senator, we're fully engaged with all the parties, including with Amtrak and the freights, to encourage their discussions and the work of their engineers to work out these issues. Should those issues not be able to be engineered away, we're standing ready to help them find additional spectrum if that's required, either through acquisition or potentially through exchanges of comparable spectrum.
Okay, so how close are we to making the decision as to whether or not the engineering issues can be resolved, and as a result, you would have to move on to finding additional spectrum?
Senator, we had our first discussions about this issue with both Amtrak and freight rail officials less than 2 weeks ago. We've already had follow-up meetings. It's too early to say, but we're clearly moving quickly on this. We understand the importance and the criticality to PTC deployment. Yeah.
Do you have a goal, Mr. Stadtler, or others, in terms of when this issue should be finally resolved?
We're using the 220 megahertz now frequency on the north end between New Haven and Boston, and we'll have that implemented by December. Because the freights are a little bit behind us, we don't envision any issues that will prevent us from putting our system in place, and we'll just work closely with them as they implement to ensure that issues are mitigated.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.